The bright lights of the television studio cast a cool glow over the stage as the audience settled into their seats. The show had just gone to a commercial break, but tension was already thick in the air. The host, a well-known liberal commentator named Ethan Callaway, leaned back in his chair with a smug grin. He had made a career out of tearing into conservative figures, and tonight was no different. Sitting across from him was Karoline Leavitt, a young, sharp-witted conservative commentator known for her unapologetic stance on freedom, small government, and American values. Though only in her 20s, she carried herself with a confidence that rivaled politicians twice her age. As the show came back from break, Ethan adjusted his tie and turned to the camera. Welcome back to the Callaway Report. We're here tonight with Karoline Leavitt, a rising star in the conservative movement. And let me just say, Karoline, it's always refreshing to have someone so young trying to defend such outdated ideas. A few chuckles rippled through the audience. Karoline, however, didn't flinch. She had expected this. Ethan continued, his tone dripping with condescension. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, Trump supporters. Your entire base seems to be made up of, let's just say, a unique group of people. Uneducated, rural, angry. Karoline raised an eyebrow. And yet, they seem to believe they're the real Americans. So tell me, Karoline, why should the rest of us take them seriously? The audience laughed, a few claps breaking out in agreement. Ethan smirked, clearly enjoying himself. Karoline, however, remained calm. She knew exactly what he was doing, baiting her, hoping she'd lose her cool. But that wasn't going to happen. She had spent years preparing for moments like this. She took a deep breath, adjusted her posture, and looked Ethan dead in the eye. You know, Ethan, she said, her voice steady but firm, I find it interesting that you claim to be the voice of inclusivity and tolerance. Yet here you are, mocking millions of hardworking Americans simply because they don't share your political beliefs. The smirk on Ethan's face wavered. The audience quieted. Karoline leaned in slightly. The people you're insulting? They're the ones who build this country. The farmers who put food on your table. The truck drivers who keep your stores stocked. The police officers and firefighters who put their lives on the line every day. Ethan shifted in his seat, his confidence starting to crack. You sit here in your fancy studio, looking down on them like they're beneath you, Karoline continued. But the truth is, without them, this country doesn't function. They are the backbone of America. A few people in the audience nodded, some even clapped softly. Ethan clearly hadn't expected this response, but Karoline wasn't done yet. And let's talk about education, shall we? She added, because I find it ironic that the people you mock, the ones you call uneducated, actually have more common sense and real-world knowledge than half the so-called intellectuals sitting in ivory towers, lecturing the rest of us about how we should live. Ethan opened his mouth to interject, but Karoline wasn't finished. The truth is, Ethan, Trump supporters aren't angry because they're ignorant. They're angry because for years people like you have ignored them, ridiculed them, and dismissed their struggles as if they don't matter. But guess what? They do matter, and they're not going anywhere. Silence. Ethan's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected her to fight back so hard, and certainly not with such composure. The audience sat in stunned silence, waiting to see how he would respond. And Karoline. She simply leaned back in her chair, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. This was just the beginning. For the first time in the entire interview, Ethan Callaway didn't have a snappy comeback ready. The usual smug confidence that carried him through countless debates seemed to falter under Karoline Leavitt's piercing gaze. The silence stretched uncomfortably, and Karoline let it. She knew the power of a pause. It gave weight to her words, forced the audience to sit with the truth. Ethan cleared his throat, shifting slightly in his chair. He wasn't about to let some young conservative commentator get the better of him on his own show. Okay, Karoline, he finally said, forcing a chuckle. That was quite the speech. Very rehearsed. But let's be real here. Trump supporters didn't just wake up one day and decide they were being ignored. They support a man who has lied, cheated, and, let's not forget, been impeached twice. And yet they treat him like some kind of savior. Why? A few audience members clapped. Ethan smirked again, feeling like he had regained the upper hand. Karoline, however, was completely unfazed. She tilted her head slightly, her expression calm but unreadable. You know, Ethan, it's funny how the media loves to talk about Trump being impeached, but never seems to mention that both times he was acquitted, she shot back smoothly. Guess that part doesn't fit the narrative, huh? Ethan's smile twitched. And as for why millions of Americans still support him, she continued, it's simple. He fought for them when no one else would. She leaned forward, locking eyes with Ethan. While career politicians sat in Washington, making backroom deals and lining their pockets, Trump actually listened to the people, the forgotten men and women of this country, the ones your party claims to care about, but somehow always leaves behind. A murmur rippled through the audience. Some nodded, others whispered amongst themselves. Ethan forced another laugh, but there was a nervous edge to it now. Oh, come on, Karoline, let's not pretend Trump is some man of the people. He's a billionaire who... And yet, working-class Americans relate to him more than they do to the elitist politicians who claim to represent them, Karoline interrupted smoothly. Why do you think that is, Ethan? He opened his mouth, but Karoline didn't give him the chance. I'll tell you why, she continued, her voice firm, because he actually talked to them. He didn't lecture them. He didn't look down on them. He didn't call them deplorables or backwards like so many on your side have. He treated them with respect, and for once, they felt heard. Ethan was visibly frustrated now. So what, Karoline? You're saying all Trump supporters are just misunderstood? That they've never done anything wrong? That they're all saints? Karoline let out a soft chuckle. Of course not, Ethan. But let's not pretend your side is full of saints either. The same people who lecture us about tolerance are the first to mock Trump supporters, insult their intelligence, and tell them their voices don't matter. And then they act shocked when those same people refuse to vote for them. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Some clapped, others sat in stunned silence. Ethan glanced at his producers off camera, clearly looking for some kind of lifeline. He was losing control of the narrative, and he knew it. Karoline saw it too, and she wasn't about to let up. Tell me something, Ethan, she said, her voice steady. If Trump supporters are so irrelevant, why are you so obsessed with them? Silence. For the first time that night, Ethan had no response. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. They were waiting, watching. And Karoline? She simply leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs, waiting for him to answer a question he couldn't. The tides had turned, and Ethan Calloway was drowning. Ethan Calloway shifted in his chair, his polished confidence unraveling with every passing second. The usual rhythm of his show, him dominating the conversation, his guests fumbling to keep up, had been completely flipped on its head. Karoline Leavitt wasn't just holding her ground. She was running the entire discussion now. The tension in the studio was thick, and the audience, sensing the shift in power, had gone silent. The usual applause and laughter that typically followed Ethan's snide remarks were nowhere to be found. Ethan tried to regain control, clearing his throat. All right, Karoline, you've had your moment, he said, forcing a smirk. But let's be honest. Your whole argument boils down to Trump supporters just want to be heard. That's fine. But what about the damage they've done? What about January 6th? What about the people who take this whole America First thing too far? At some point, don't you have to take responsibility for the movement you're defending? A few audience members clapped hesitantly, as if they weren't sure if it was the right time. Ethan leaned forward, emboldened. I mean, come on, he continued. Isn't it just a little hypocritical to claim victimhood while supporting a guy who thrives on division? Karoline exhaled slowly, giving Ethan a long, steady look. Ethan, she said, her voice calm but unshakable, do you hold the entire Democratic Party responsible for the summer of riots in 2020? Ethan's smug expression faltered. That's different, he stammered. Those were protests. Oh, right. Protests. Karoline cut in. nodding sarcastically. So when left-wing activists burn down businesses, loot stores, and attack police officers, it's protesting. But when working-class Americans push back against an establishment that has ignored them for decades, suddenly the entire movement is labeled as dangerous. Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm not excusing anyone who broke the law," Karoline continued, "but I refuse to let you sit here and pretend like political violence is a one-sided issue, because it's not, and you know it." A few people in the audience clapped, louder this time. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ethan rubbed his temple, realizing this conversation had spiraled completely out of his control. Karoline wasn't done. "You asked about responsibility, so let's talk about it," she said, leaning forward slightly. "Where was your outrage when businesses were destroyed in cities across America? When innocent people lost their livelihoods? When politicians in your party bailed rioters out of jail? Or do you only care about accountability when it fits your narrative?" The audience reaction was undeniable now. There were murmurs, nods, even a few cheers. Ethan sighed, clearly irritated. He glanced at the camera, then at his producer, as if silently pleading for a commercial break. Karoline let the silence stretch again, then delivered the final blow. "The truth is, Ethan, people like you don't actually want a conversation," she said. "You want a villain. You want someone to blame. And when working-class Americans stopped listening to your party and started fighting for themselves, that scared you. That's why you mock them. That's why you attack them. But guess what?" She smiled, a calm, self-assured smile. "They don't need your approval." Boom. The audience erupted. Some people stood and clapped. Others sat in stunned silence. Ethan Callaway, the man who had built a career tearing down conservatives on live television, had been completely and utterly wrecked on his own show. He fumbled to regain his composure, but it was too late. The damage was done. Karoline Leavitt had walked into that studio as just another guest. She walked out as the woman who shut Ethan Callaway down in front of the entire country. Karoline Leavitt didn't just hold her own. She completely flipped the script on a host who thought he could embarrass her. Instead, she exposed the double standards, challenged the narrative, and left the entire audience stunned. This is why voices like hers matter. People are waking up. They're pushing back against the media spin and standing up for what they believe in without apology. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. And let me know in the comments, what did you think of Karoline's response? Did she handle it perfectly? Or would you have said something different? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.